I have a club that is hang out after school and play video games, and I can't get kids to come to it. How the heck am I supposed to keep them engaged in a class about convection in the atmosphere, creating weather fronts? Like, I can't get them interested in video games.
Welcome to Learning Through Technology, a K-12 EdTech podcast proudly presented by STS Education. I'm Alex Hermon, founder of Educational Collaborators.
And I'm Bob Cerruti, founder of the EduTech Group. We're here to bring educators together, helping them unlock the full potential of learning through technology.
Tune in every other week as we connect with education leaders and dive deep into topics that matter to you, delivering actionable ideas straight to your school. Welcome to the show. All right, welcome everyone to our second installment of our interview with Nick Stahl. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to the first episode, I want you to go back and enjoy that episode because this is really a continuation of what has been a spectacular conversation. Right, Bob?
It really has been. And I'll take the blame if any of our listeners, listen to the part 2 of this and they think it's too much, Nick, because Nick started talking about game theory and I kind of geeked out. I never thought we'd have a conversation about game theory with high school students. I don't know that I learned game theory in college. I think I learned game theory on my own. And I was like, whoa. Can we talk about that more? And our ever-indulgent executive producer, Sophia, said 2 parts would be good. So here we are with the second part of our conversation with Nick.
Just so Bob could nerd out. All right, let's get into this.
So now I have this question that's going to kind of take us back to esports, though. You started with, you were the guy who wouldn't say no to a club. You would help with this club and that club. So I'd like you to tell us a bit. I mean, the whole idea of these clubs is for student engagement. So they have something to do in school. And not all of us were academics in school, right, Alex? Well, Alex was in front of the class. Never mind.
Bob wasn't an academic. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Bob was at the back of the class?
Yeah.
Or out the door, right. I might have skipped a class or two. But I'd like your thoughts on how does esports as an engagement tool by number of students or varying degrees of engagement compared to the other clubs that you were an advisor for?
So it really started 2019 for reasons I'm sure everybody can guess, that we saw that any kind of goal-oriented club or organization was still doing okay, getting kids engaged, keeping their rosters filled for traditional sports because they had competitions, championships to try and work towards. And like the theater program had their shows and their performances that they were working on. NHS and Key Club, even academic kind of clubs, they still had a goal that they were working towards. But all of the clubs that we had that were just students hanging out after school, sharing something that they were interested in, they were all shriveling and dying on the vine. 2019, 20, 21, and still 23, 24, we saw 1 or 2 passionate kids trying to keep anime club or conspiracy club, or we had our game club that we mentioned before. And that was kind of how the conversation went. I was like, I have a club that is hang out after school and play video games, and I can't get kids to come to it. How the heck am I supposed to keep them engaged in a class about convection in the atmosphere, creating weather fronts? Like, I can't get them interested in video games. So yeah, that's kind of what happened to our casual clubs. I don't know what the answer is going to be for that. I think the jury's definitely still out on why that's happening. If it's COVID, if it's social media, if it's just some sort of change in the way the human brain works. Those clubs don't seem to be doing so well. And I don't think that's a Hermon story. I don't think it's a Maine story. I think it's probably a global story for the most part.
I get that from the club side. And then I like that approach that you had for goal-oriented stuff. You move towards these STEM toys, tech tools, the opportunity to play, and then next semester moving into the game theory. Are you finding that that is in the classroom bringing that level of engagement that you want the students to have? Are the students feeling this?
Yeah, so a little bit of a catch-22, I guess. Like, the students who are taking it are having a great time. They're really locking in on the idea to create, to play around. It helps that these classes don't really conform So, like, for instance, most of my other science courses, we don't follow NGSS like letter by letter. So we can wiggle around, but we are informed by NGSS. And that sets like kind of the pace. Even the freshman science classes, the amount of content that we have to cover freshman year to keep those kids on pace for where they're supposed to be as a sophomore. When they get ready to take a standardized test, there's certain things that they're supposed to have covered as a freshman, as a sophomore, as a junior. So steam powered science, we don't have that. We can take the time to explore, like if kids really, really get into 3D design, I can throw another week or two playing around with Tinkercad and making 3D designs and go past like the really basic shapes into more advanced stuff anytime we want. And I don't have to worry about, oh, crud, we never even got to app development and they're going to have to take the app development SATs at the end of sophomore year. But that's not really a thing. So yeah, it gives them more time.
Let me get this straight. If you teach kids interesting things that are not dictated by somebody who doesn't know how to teach, they're more engaged and they learn skills that are useful. Sounds like crazy talk to me, man. Sounds crazy.
Okay, just promise you're not going to start giving me the whole, we should teach them how to do their taxes and how to drive stick shift and stuff like that, because that's a whole different argument. That's a different episode.
No, I was a science kid. I was engaged in science. I liked science, went on to study engineering. But there are parts where you're teaching to the book or the test or the whatever, because that crud happens in real classes, right? We have to get to this material before end of course exams or before state testing. And it's a real clock that moves you off of stuff that is engaging students and pushes you into the next unit or the next topic. And my checkered educational past says that if I had a teacher like you, I would have been there. I would have been interested. I would have stuck with it. I did, for the record, graduate, but I would have been much more engaged, is I guess what I'm getting at. Now I'll let Alex mock that.
No, actually, most of the classes that I taught were electives. And I must admit, I did doing electives a lot more than the sort of core curriculum, because the core curriculum, there's a greater expectations of the standards and where you need to be, as you're saying, Nick, right, in their development. Though I understand why that exists, it limits your flexibility to really follow the curiosity of the class. And that can be pretty magical. When you've got students who are very curious about something, there's a way to bring an energy and a focus and an effort to their work in the class that's a little harder when you're letting something that's outside of them drive the pace of the class. And I think to some degree, that's kind of what game theory does, is it creates conditions under which the students are going to bring that curiosity, that energy, that effort to thinking. And it's harder to run a course with that kind of pace, where that is what drives where you spend your time, when you have curriculum and standards benchmarks that you have to hit.
When I was going through my teaching degree as kind of an old guy, what you would call a non-traditional learner, I've only been at this for about 8 years. But there was a huge push for student-driven learning, give them a problem and give them some resources and let them kind of play around with how to solve that. That takes time, though, like that takes a long time. And I don't know, like, I feel like I'm definitely still figuring out what I think the answer is, because sometimes that is a total dumpster fire when I give kids, for example, one of the things we do in Earth in Action is density, seawater. We say when you take a fluid and you heat it up, it becomes less dense. So it tends to float to the surface in a bunch of similar material. And then if you cool something down, it gets more dense and it sinks to the bottom. Yeah, sure, no problem. And then they say, okay, but if you add salt to a fluid like water, it becomes more dense and it sinks. And if you take salt out, it becomes less dense and it tends to rise. So at the equator, we've got both things happening because of evaporation. The sun is heating up the equator. It's making it really hot. The water's all evaporating. So the water's getting warm from all that heat from the sun, but it's also becoming more salty because the fresh water is evaporating, leaving the salt behind. So I give them that problem. I like, so what's going to happen? Is the density of this water going to go up or is it going to go down? Here's a bunch of hot plates, here's some glassware and some water, here's a bunch of salt, and you work with your group. You figure out an experiment to find out, and they get a few class periods to come up with an experimental design, conduct the experiment, and then form a conclusion. What do you think is more important, temperature or saltiness? And we do that twice a year because it's a semester long class. And sometimes that's brilliant, and sometimes it's a total train wreck. So it's hard to predict that sort of stuff. And also, like, sometimes you got to learn boring stuff. Like, that's a thing that's going to happen throughout your life. So my answer to the why are we learning this question is usually like you're thinking about the wrong way. Like, you're not learning about the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell because you're necessarily going to be a microbiologist. It's weight training for your brain, right? I'm giving you some information and you are going to practice absorbing that information, retaining that information, and then applying that information. So later on in your life, this might be information about catalytic converters instead of biology. It might be about arc welding, or it might be about computer science line coding. But at some point, you're going to have to take on some new information. Sometimes it's going to be stuff that you're interested and passionate about. Sometimes you'll have room and flexibility and time to experiment and come up with your own solution. Sometimes you just got to learn some tax code to keep your business from getting slammed with a bunch of fines. And you got to be able to do both, I think.
Are you dealing with too many broken Chromebooks at your school? It can be tough to keep up. That's where the STS Education and FedEx Fixed Cost Chromebook Repair Program comes in. For $99, we take care of everything: shipping, parts, and labor. This means fewer headaches for you and more consistent learning for your students. To learn more, check out stsed.com/break-fix. So I have a well-known short attention span. So I'm going to ask this question now before it flits on out of my mind forever and never to be seen again. But I have this epiphany. 20 years I've been doing this, and I literally had this thought while we were talking. So poo-poo it if you shall. You said 100% right. When you're teaching, you're given 15 weeks or whatever to teach this. And there's no time, your words, no time for whatever. The best teachers I had, and Alex and I talked to people about their teachers, they had the time. They built a relationship with me. That's why I went to their classes, not because I enjoyed ninth grade English, but because Mr. Wampum built a relationship with me. So I have this epiphany that those electives are not just there to learn the little interesting things, but for you to have the time to build the relationship so that that student is willing to invest in the core curriculum classes, that they have to learn the boring stuff or they have to do the weight training of your mind. Maybe all the educators already know that, but this guy just figured it out now. Am I on the right path, Nick? Does that sound like something that's happening for you?
Yeah, totally. Like, you got to split the difference. So my wife is a librarian currently right here in the same building. We get to work together, although I don't actually see her anywhere because I'm a cave troll. I don't leave my room. But she used to teach fourth and fifth grade. And I would just look at her with unashamed envy because she would have a class of 12 to 15 kids, but she had them all day for the entire school year, that same group of kids. And she would develop relationships with those kids that were very, very thorough. Like, she knew all kinds of stuff. Like, she would have insight into what was going on at home. She would know their interests. She would know their learning styles. Some teachers can lock that in fast enough to do that at the high school level, but I'm not one of them. I'll admit, I have semester long courses for the freshmen, like I said. So I've got somewhere between 100 and 120 students at any given moment. And a good chunk of those are going to be different in the second half of the year. So I call it a win if I get everybody's names right. Seriously, by the end of the year, I definitely know everybody's first names, but there are still some that I have to know. What the heck? Which Evan is that? Like, I've had 6 of them. I got to figure out which Evan I'm talking about. So as much as I wish, I really genuinely desire to know them on a deeper level, it's just not going to happen. I don't think in the time that we have 80-minute block every other day for 30 classes, and then they move on to somebody else.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the teacher who volunteers for 6 clubs is somebody who struggles to build relationships with students, but I appreciate the challenge that you have with your 120 students for sure.
Well, Nick, as we kind of wrap this up, we have a few questions that we ask people. And the first one is, and I guess I keep going back to this because I'm just amazed that you built this from nothing, is, and it doesn't have to be the esports, but what are you most proud of in your career in schools?
So I think the thing I'm most proud of is the fact that we have I'm not a networking guy. I am physically and visibly uncomfortable at conference type things. Although my favorite thing about that NASEF conference that we are talking about earlier was that it was virtual. So I didn't have to be there physically. Small talk makes me very uncomfortable. So I'm actually proud of how far out we've reached already. Next year, I'm in talks with AJ Cool, is the director of the esports team at Husson University. And I've been talking with him about a mentor program next year where their students, the college level, will come down and spend a couple of days with our players and just kind of give them some tips and advice. And hopefully, I'm like secretly hoping that they'll talk about a bunch of college stuff while they're here. And then vice versa, we'll do a couple of trips up there to check out their facility and kind of give a visual, physical reality to that idea of like, hey, this is something that could be like a thing that gets me into school. I kind of forgot it for a moment, but part of a question that you had asked earlier in the show that I could come back to here, because I'm also super proud of, is that those 50 kids that signed up for esports this year, we were not stealing kids from football or baseball or softball or field hockey. This was a completely different group of kids. And you could cherry pick 2 or 3 off of that list that also played traditional sports or maybe were in the theater production, but the vast majority of them, they would not have done anything with a group of other students here at the school other than, hanging out with a couple of friends in the cafeteria or in a study hall or something like that. So we were tapping into a completely unserved community. And I'm hoping that that will continue to be true and it'll just get bigger.
It's one of my favorite pieces of esports stories. We hear that a lot, actually, is that the people who are drawn into it are the people who are currently not really engaged in many other activities. And so it's a pretty exciting thing. So, Nick, it sounds like you've got a pretty creative and supportive principal, which is amazing. But if money were no object, right, like you had all the funding that you could need for a passion project, you're a pretty creative educator. I'm curious to know, what would your passion project be if money were not a challenge?
Our biggest problem right now already, as weird as this sounds, like I said, year zero, we're a baby program, still very much figuring out how this is going to work. But our biggest problem is space already. We have a cool little space. It's right next to the library. It's actually part of the library. It's called the Fishbowl because one whole wall is just giant picture windows. And then there's 10 gaming PCs in there and 4 Nintendo Switch consoles. And if somebody showed up in a truck and gave me 10 more gaming PCs to get like 2 more teams running, I wouldn't have anywhere to put it. They'd stay on the truck. I'd find a place to stash them until I could figure it out. Don't get me wrong. And that's not an easy problem to fix because, like I said, our school is growing every year. So we're struggling to find classroom space for students. So me asking for a larger gaming den is as much as Mr. Walsh would probably try to support that idea. I think that's going to be a hard ask. And I don't know how that's going to play out over the next few years. Definitely, there are plans, I know, for renovations and improving and making that space. It's already gone from an empty storage space basically to a semi-legit esports lab. I'm pretty proud of it. I'm sure it would be embarrassing to compare to some of the, especially the college level esports facilities, but we're coming along pretty nicely, but it's small and fitting another 20 kids. If all those freshmen who signed up for next year actually show up, I'm not going to have anywhere to put them.
Our sponsor for this podcast, STS Education, they put together a mobile stadium that they have in like a big trailer. And it is so cool. So they'll bring it over to schools that don't have a dedicated facility and then run esports competitions there. It's a ton of fun. Now they're in Southern California, so it's a little easier for them to like toss the awning and set up some tables and have half the people outside and half the people in the trailer. You can do that in the summer in Maine, but you're not doing that for your winter sports. Esports tournament.
Yeah, and it would be scary as heck to schedule in Maine because our weather is infamously unpredictable. You could literally be pulling into the parking lot, clear skies, sunny and beautiful, and then we could have a raging thunderstorm half an hour later.
Nick, this brings us to the last question that we ask everybody. And there's no pressure or anything, but my win streak continues if you answer it correctly. So, favorite or most influential teacher? Who is it and why?
Mrs. Letty was my English teacher in high school, and she made us read. There's no question that we must have done grammar and spelling and all of that stuff because you have to, but mostly we just read all really great books. I didn't realize it at the time, but we read a ton of books. My brother, by comparison, my younger brother went to a different school in Louisiana, and I was just shocked. All 4 years of high school, they never read a single book. They did excerpts, paragraphs for reading comprehension, but mostly it was just like punctuation, spelling, grammar, and they just never read anything. Mrs. Letty was a very welcoming and open person, and she just kind of exposed us to great stuff. Beowulf and Catcher in the Rye, you name it. Like, we were hitting some awesome stuff.
All right, Nick. I know Bob said last question, but have you listened to any other episodes of this podcast? It's okay if you have not.
I have not.
All right. So the importance of that last question is that early on, I suggested that some of our guests may struggle coming up with that one teacher who really had that biggest impact. Bob believes that everybody's going to know that at the top of their mind with no question at all. And you clearly knew the answer to that question before Bob even finished asking it. So I just had to know if you cheated. But no, you didn't cheat. Bob actually wins this time. You knew exactly who you were going to ask. Nick, this was a fantastic time. Thanks so much. We had as much fun with you sort of before the podcast as we did afterwards. We all kind of chuckled that like, oh, wait, we haven't recorded because like we could have put that whole thing in the can. So it was just a great conversation. So Nick, thanks so much for joining the show today. Thanks for everything you do for your students at Hermon. And I hope the community rewards you with the gigantic Nick Stahl Gaming Center so that you can continue to expand all the creative things that you're doing in the classroom. So thanks so much for joining us.
The Nick Stahl Gaming Center is actually part of Mr. Walsh made the mistake of telling me to write my own letter of recommendation. I'm trying to do a fellowship through NASEF next year, and they requested a letter of endorsement from the administration. And I asked Mr. Walsh about it, and he'd be like, yeah, I'd be absolutely happy to sign that after you write it. And so just as a joke, I gave him two versions. The first version I gave him included quite a few embellishments, such as the Nick Stahl Gaming Center and breaking ground on all of my incredible achievements.
That sounds fantastic.
Also, if it takes any sting out of losing the bet, I met Mrs. Letty again as an adult, and she had no idea who I was. She was very nice about it, but it was very obvious she didn't remember me at all.
We're not getting into that. It's a win for me. It's a win for me.
But I think there are so many teachers for whom they're just amazing people. They have a great impact on students, and they do that over and over and over every year. Nick, you strike me as one of those kinds of folks. So thanks so much for joining us on the show today. It was great having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I can't wait to listen.
More of another great episode. And we end our episodes with who's your favorite teacher? And yes, Bob, you won again. Nick immediately knew who his favorite teacher was, so he gave us that. But I listened to how he approached his classes. And honestly, if I were one of his students, I'm pretty sure Nick would be one of my favorite teachers. He just had that student orientation that was precisely what connected me, and I think you in your descriptions as well, Bob, to teachers. I think he'd be on the top of both of our lists.
He really would be. I mean, it was obvious that his students would enjoy him and that he gets what his students are looking for. What struck me is we've done episodes now about AI and esports because those are hot topics in education. We've done other episodes as well, diversity and equity and inclusion, but we've done multiple from different views, not the same episode, but different views on AI and esports. But it was really interesting to me to talk about those electives that allowed him to build those relationships with those students. And of course, as I said in the intro, we got this whole second episode because Bob wanted to talk about game theory some and in an elective that he covered in. And I think, I don't know if this is for us to talk about, but you know me, I'll just talk about it anyway, is I know a lot of our schools are facing financial crunches now because of funding from ESSER. The first thing to go is going to be those electives. And that just breaks my heart when I hear that that's where these relationships are being built with the students who might have been like me, who weren't as engaged in, say, your core English class or your social studies class, but would certainly have been interested in talking about game theory or gaming. I hope that Mr. Walsh and Nick find a way to keep those together for those students.
Absolutely. And the second part of the episode, or the second part of our interview, talked about game theory, which was great, and some of the things that he's doing in his classes. And so we really want to reach out and ask our audience, hey, share some ideas with us about things that you want to hear about so that we can find our network of community of educators is vast. And we want to reach out. And if you have topics or people that you want to hear from, please share those with us. So email us at podcast@stsed.com and share your thoughts. We really want to hear from you and keep these podcasts going. So thanks everyone for joining us today.
Learning Through Technology, a K-12 EdTech podcast, is brought to you by STS Education, a Pacific OneSource company. To learn more about how educators can leverage technology to drive successful educational outcomes, check us out at www.stsed.com. Connect with us by searching for Learning Through Technology in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss an episode. On behalf of the team at STS Education, thanks for joining us.